Welcome to the
Club Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome everyone to the Club Dub Football Podcast. It's time for the recap show. All the stories, action and misadventure from the weekend's games all crammed into one great bite-sized spectacle. The guys are ready, so let's jump right in.
So hi gents. Hi Rob, welcome back for episode 54. Oh, thank you ever so much. Lovely to be back after the joys of COVID-19. But there are bigger joys to share with the listenership, which is because it's Christmas week, we'll be doing 2 episodes where we're all in the same room. Hey. Nice to get together and have fun with friends and talk about American football. So, welcome to the recap show, and we're going to recap a bizarre, up and down kind of week in the NFL for many of our teams. And let me start, before I throw it over to you guys, with a recap of all the scores from the week just gone. So it started with the San Francisco 49ers losing 17-20 to a depleted Tennessee Titans. We had the Green Bay Packers in record-breaking form, winning 24-22 over the pretty hapless Cleveland Browns. A game I feel that we should almost skip over, the Christmas Day game where the Colts beat the Cardinals by 22 points to 16. The Giants only put up 10 points against a rampant Philadelphia Eagles, who put up 34. The Rams won 30-23 against a frisky but still pretty hopeless Minnesota Vikings. The Buffalo Bills managed to win the top spot in the division with a 33-21 point win over the pretty highly fancied New England Patriots. And then we have the Buccaneers 32, the Panthers 6, the Jaguars 21, the Jets 26, the Lions 16, the Falcons 20, and then the Chargers inexplicably 29, the Houston Texans 41. You've then got the Ravens 21, the Bengals 41, the Bears somehow winning 25-24 over the Seahawks, Steelers 10, Chiefs 36, Broncos 13, Raiders 17, and then the football team putting up a mere 14 points against the Cowboys' massive 56. And then we end the week's action with the longest win streak in the NFL. The Miami Dolphins 20, the New Orleans Saints just 3. So if those are all of the scores from the week just gone, Aldrin, I'm going to throw over to you. What was your takeaway from the week? Biggest surprise, greatest performance? Tell us where we're going to start and why.
Well, I think we have to go back to the Colts versus Cardinals game, don't we? I mean, it was the greatest game of Christmas. No, I think that was a good game just purely because it was one of those games where the Colts went out into a lead and could easily have crumbled like we have earlier in the season, and we didn't do that. We had another Jonathan Taylor 60-plus yard run to seal the game. I don't know, the other games were just a weird mix, weren't they, where you had, I don't know, random teams like the Dolphins. I mean, the Saints were massively depleted, particularly at quarterback, but still, the Dolphins got it done. And like you said, they're on a 7-game win streak now, so yeah, just a few odd mixes in there, I think.
The oddest one, the Cardinals-Colts, was odd for me because you're absolutely right about the Taylor at 2 runs, one to start the game and one ultimately to end the game.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I thought the Cardinals kept him pretty quiet. But then when we go down, we seem to have no way of just steadying that ship. We do ridiculous things, going for it on 4th down and then picking plays that seemed doomed from the start. We had an odd day where Matt Prater just couldn't kick. And just in the red zone, for all of the yards we put up, nearly 400 yards, just no red zone threat at all. So without Hopkins and, even with second choice running backs, we just suddenly look really ordinary. But yeah, congratulations to the Colts, who look like they might be getting it right at just the right time. If it wasn't for some of the superpowers like the Cowboys putting up crazy points of performances, you'd think the Colts would be feeling really bullish about their chances of going all the way. So, Aldrin, if you pick the hurtful and painful Colts win over the Cardinals, JB, what are you going for?
I think performance of the week has to be those Dallas Cowboys that you just mentioned.
So good.
42 points before the half is an absolutely incredible result. And that's coming on the back of a weekend, really, that saw quite a lot of high-scoring games and high-scoring teams. Like, we talked about the Bengals scoring 41 against the Ravens, which obviously I loved. We talked about the Texans scoring 41. There were a number of teams that got over 30. It was a really high-scoring weekend, which maybe as a result of the amount of COVID impact there's been sort of yet again, like we felt it on our podcast, finally getting our full lineup back off the COVID list. And you've got to look and think, as we're getting this close to the end of the season now, are playoff implications going to be because of COVID restrictions rather than necessarily because of good or bad play by teams?
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like, incredibly, we didn't really lose a game in the playoffs last year to COVID, did we? I mean, we had a season where stadiums were empty for 90% of the time and so on, but we didn't really have a game where you thought, such and such team's season ended because of COVID. And this year it feels like we could have that. You do feel it could spoil the party. But some of the teams, I mean, every team has certain problems when it comes to COVID, and some just seem to be able to weather them far better than others. I mean, PB, I don't know what you thought of the Bucks, but they started really shaky before they kind of found their groove against a Panthers team that were just hopeless. I just don't know where that performance comes from when you're bringing in and out two quarterbacks and neither of them seem to be able to get it done. It just feels like certain teams just haven't been able to steady the ship or find a way at all.
Yeah, it was certainly strange. If you look at the Panthers, it was almost certainly Cam Newton's last game starting at home or playing at home for the Panthers, so a lot of the TV coverage was focused on him just standing on the sideline with a towel over his shoulders, for the second half. And obviously they're giving Darnold as much chance as possible to play his way into that fifth-year option next year. For the Bucks, you're right, I think we did start shaky, but that's naturally going to come when you're missing your top two receivers and your now number one receiver Antonio Brown coming back from a 3-game suspension. So
run it back. You had Fournette.
Yeah, Fournette was out as well. So obviously Rojo, who you'd thought would be the lead back, and ultimately did start the game, but then Keyshawn Vaughn comes from out of nowhere with a 55-yard run, so touchdown run. So there were some big performances from bit part players, and I think that probably tells the story of why it was a bit of a slow start for the offense, but the D certainly played well.
Yeah, it feels like a couple of teams just didn't find the right balance with players out. I mean, the Chargers were one of them. I mean, a team that aren't strong against the run, but you take out a couple of important pieces on defence. And I mean, Rex Burkhead absolutely tore them to shreds. And every time the Chargers got back into it with a touchdown, the Texans just went the length of the field. I mean, it was just remarkable. But for me, the two things that stand out is we've had a few doubts about AFC superpowers this season. And I think it's pretty telling that we're now looking at the Chiefs looking, pretty much unstoppable again as they have in previous years. And also the Bills. I don't think you can underestimate for me what a big win that is over the Patriots. I think the Bills looked good enough to think they could absolutely stack up against the best in either conference. And I mean, we started the year having them as pretty much universally amongst our Super Bowl favourites. And I think they're very slowly playing their way back into that. The question that comes for me after last week is, we talk about the Dolphins, and Phil, you shared a stat with us earlier, the only team in NFL history to have a 7-game losing streak and 7-game winning streak in the same season. Are the Dolphins any good? I mean, you look at that schedule and you look at the teams they've beaten, and there are some unspectacular names in there, but they keep winning. I mean, they could go into the postseason, they could still get themselves in and actually go in on the hottest streak in the whole of the league. I mean, the Chiefs are not far behind. But I mean, are the Dolphins really to be taken seriously as a postseason threat?
I think so. I think before the season, most of us picked them as a playoff team. Based on they improved last year and only just missed the playoffs and would improve further. And obviously when they were 1-7 or whatever they were to start the season, it was a bit of a surprise. But I think they are definitely a playoff team. Whether they can go, I don't think they have the quarterback play, certainly not at the moment, to go the whole way. I don't think they'd make the Super Bowl, but they'll certainly be there or thereabouts on Wildcard Weekend.
I think I'm not convinced about Tua still. They've got almost a non-existent running game. I think against good opponents in the postseason, they really struggle. Waddle looks amazing, isn't he? On track to break the receptions record for a rookie.
Yeah, one of the rookie records. Yeah.
But beyond that, I still don't see a heck of a lot of playmakers there. I think they got the job done against the Saints, but equally the Saints had an incredibly deer in headlights Ian Book at quarterback, and their offense spent so little time on the field that they were a non-factor. So I don't know. I just think against really good teams, maybe against good teams that aren't impacted by COVID, then they just struggle.
See, I think when we talk about the Dolphins, or when we talk about any team and we're measuring how successful they've been, I think the big thing to consider is, what do you consider to be a victory? Like, Rob and I had a bit of a conversation on Sunday during Red Zone, where I kind of said, in my mind, the difference between a good season and a bad season was 10-6 versus 9-7. And how, now that we've got 17 games, it's 10-7 versus 11-6, measuring whether a team is successful or not in terms of a record. From a Dolphins point of view, after a 7-game losing streak, then making it to the playoffs has to go down as a success.
Oh, yeah.
And it is kind of that thing of, where do you draw the line in terms of how they've done? And I get your point, and I agree with it to a degree of, you wouldn't fancy the Dolphins versus the Bills or the Chiefs or like whoever it is that eventually comes out of the South, if it's the Titans or if it's the Colts or anything like that. But there is also a little bit of, well, everything changes in the playoffs. The goal of the regular season is you get there, and after that it's like, well, we haven't got anything, like, there is no tomorrow necessarily guaranteed, so we need to go out there and throw everything that we've got at it. And no, I wouldn't have the Dolphins ranked highly in my chances, but I also wouldn't want to necessarily guarantee they'll do nothing.
There's a weird thing though about the Tennessee Titans going so under the radar, having lost Henry and also receivers through the season, and they're gradually starting to get back to health across the roster. But actually there's been a great job done there just to keep them in the hunt. That they had the types of injuries where you could have seen a season falling apart. And Vrabel just isn't that kind of coach, is he? I mean, he really is starting to put himself up amongst the best coaches in the league. And we were talking about this earlier, the Harbaughs, the Arians, obviously the Belichick and the Reeds of this world. I think he's starting to put himself in that bracket. He's not as flash or as futuristic as a Sean McVay. He's not bringing concepts to the league that have never been seen before. But what he is able to do is just really coach a group of players really well to be competitive. And even with their struggles, you can imagine, even if they lost Tannehill for a long part of the season, they would find a way in enough games to stay in the mix. And I think as much as they've not been too flash or too splashy, they're still a really good football team. They will give anyone a game, and I think credit to that coaching staff, because they should be, out of it otherwise.
Yeah, annoying. Well, it's really annoying, because a couple of games ago I thought we were in with a really good shot of winning the division, and they've just kept winning games by narrow margins. By I think the last few games Tannehill's probably thrown for less than 150 yards, and in a couple of games not even thrown a touchdown pass. I mean, the weekend was different when they had AJ Brown back, and all of a sudden, I think Tannehill threw for something like 220 yards, and 150 of those were to AJ Brown. I mean, it was ridiculous. That vertical
threat is back.
But they're winning games, and there's no, at the minute, at the start of the season you would have said, well, Derrick Henry's the focal point, AJ Brown adds a little bit of extra threat as they get deep in the red zone to keep some defences honest, but ultimately it's the Derrick Henry show. And now they've kind of gone from that to being just a team rather than any kind of one individual. None of them are splashy, none of them are brilliant playmakers. They just do enough to get the job done. Yeah, it's annoying.
It's a weird one, because it leads me to my next question. Who is the worst team who are going to make the playoffs? Who do we think is the team that everybody would love to be playing on that first Wildcard Weekend? I was about to say Sunday, but you could have Saturday as well, I suppose. Who's the team you would love to play on the AFC or NFC side that you think will really actually struggle with the bright lights?
I don't know. I'm trying to think who's actually in the playoff hunt at the minute.
Are you going off the teams that are in now?
If we go off this week, or likely.
I mean, I
think the Dolphins are going to be there or thereabouts, but I don't think you'd fear them, or the Raiders, or the Ravens, or or the Steelers, the Broncos. I don't think you would worry about teams like that in the AFC.
if I could then offer an AFC team for us just to discuss,
Yeah.
I would not fear the New England Patriots. Discuss.
You see, I mean, I wouldn't fear their quarterback, but just as a team, they're anything with Bill Belichick coaching it now, particularly now they've got a healthy defense. Do you not think they can just ride that defense and beat a lot of teams?
Based on the last 2 weeks, no, absolutely not, because that defense showed nothing against the caliber of the team that you're going to play in the playoffs. And this is again kind of the thing that we have to consider about when we regards to what we talked about roughly this time last year when we first started this podcast and we were talking about the playoffs. We were talking about how high-powered the Chiefs were. And how you couldn't count against Andy Reid and you couldn't count against Patrick Mahomes. And then we got to the Super Bowl and every element of that Kansas City team was outclassed completely by a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that just came in and just said, you know what? Nah, not having that. We're gonna show everything that we execute is fantastic. And I kind of have a little bit of the same thing here. I think you look at the Patriots and the Patriots have got good players spread out amongst their team, like Donta Hightower, JC Jackson, those kind of guys, but there isn't anything in there that they're showing at the moment that says, yes, that is a team that I would consistently expect to do well throughout the playoffs. They go up against like a Bucs team or something like that, and all of a sudden that's a very ordinary Patriots team.
I think you talk about their problems the last 2 weeks. They've had a rookie quarterback who started making rookie quarterback mistakes, who started overthrowing, a few turnovers. And the problem is when you built like the Patriots to win by narrow margins and to ride your defence,
you can't have those
a couple of turnovers are going to count against you, particularly when you're playing like the Buffalo Bills. I think the Patriots would need to play clean. I don't think they would need to play better. I don't think it's like we haven't seen that level yet from the Patriots. You know, they'd have to find another gear, which I think the Dolphins would have to do. I haven't seen a dominant Dolphins win that's made me think, wow, you know, these guys can start dreaming big. I think the Patriots, I'm kind of with you, Aldrin. Belichick just game plans for individual games as well as anybody.
Yeah.
And he could find a way, but equally, yeah, they're all of a sudden outside looking in after the last 2 weeks. I'll give you that. I mean, selfishly, if we go NFC, the Cardinals...
I was going to say...
I mean, are they... I mean, it's a weird one because people go, oh, they're not playing as well as they used to, but they put up a lot of yards against the Colts. They just couldn't score 7, and when it came to field goals, we had a field goal kicker who had one of those days in Matt Prater. But without Connor, and all of a sudden without Hopkins, well, yeah, we're not that great in the red zone. We don't have that threat. I think we weren't brave enough to run Kyler Murray more often. I think ultimately it's got the feel that everybody wants to stay healthy and everybody's got one eye on playoff football.
Yeah.
When at the moment they could be the worst team who make it into the playoffs on the NFC side. I mean, what defeats to... I mean, the Colts wasn't embarrassing, but it was poor. The Lions was embarrassing. And then before that, it wasn't particularly great against the Rams. You know, we had the ball and we had a chance to go and tie it up late from an awful long way back. But I mean, are the Cardinals, are they going to be able to find that early season form? Or are they just going to be one and done? And from where they were, one and done feels like a real missed opportunity. Yes, we might have JJ Watt back. Yes, we might have Hopkins back. But straight off the treatment table, straight into playoff football, it doesn't tend to go well, does it?
They just don't seem to have a lot of answers at the minute. And they seem to have gone into that slump. You know, we've talked a few times, haven't we, where you say it's not how you play in October or November necessarily, but it's getting to January and, you know, picking up form then. I think the Cardinals have kind of gone the opposite way, really. In the same way to JB's point about the Patriots. You know, Mac Jones has kind of hit that rookie slump just at the wrong time, you know, as you're going towards the playoff, having not really thrown any interceptions, to be throwing multiple picks in consecutive games isn't ideal. The same with the Cardinals. They've kind of gone off the boil, had injuries at just the wrong time, and also I guess maybe come up against difficult opponents. You know, they've had, take the Lions out of that, but you know, the Rams and the Colts are playoff bound teams potentially that are putting up decent amounts of points every game. But yeah, I don't know that Cliff Kingsbury seems to have any answers, and I think that's the more troubling thing, is that he doesn't seem to be able to coach them up and get them out of that slump at the minute.
Well, I do worry about that. This will be Cliff Kingsbury's first ever winning season as a head coach, either at college or NFL level, and that is spectacular, really. I mean, the only thing that gives me hope, actually, and this has been a Cardinals fan, so this is a level of detail you wouldn't jump into on every team. We were without Rodney Hudson, and he is such a huge part of what we do on offense. He is so good at identifying what defenses are going to do. The way he plays with Kyler is incredible. But I mean, he's the hope.
On the flip side, though, the Colts had a completely new offensive line and no Darius Leonard, so there was not the same defense or opponent that you could have been up against.
Exactly. It was more the fact that in the red zone we were completely inept. We just didn't have anything, and actually when you've got a good tight end, and I still think 2 good receivers, even without Hopkins, I think that's a poor show. I think AJ Green is certainly good enough. Christian Kirk is certainly good enough. Zach Ertz should be doing more. But yeah, maybe the Cardinals are the one that sneaks through.
Go on, Phil. Who do you think?
What, worst playoff team? Or
yeah,
if the Vikings make it, I wouldn't mind playing the Vikings. But I think the Cardinals is a good shout, to be honest. They haven't got a fantastic running game. I don't think Kyler Murray is putting up big plays as he has done over the past, certainly last season, if not the season before as well. And they have gone off the boil a little bit. But who's to say, if the Cardinals win this weekend and the Rams lose, and they've not looked as good lately, then you could be talking about the Cardinals being one of the top 3 seeds again. So I think the NFC is harder to call. There are less teams I'd like to play in the NFC than there are in the AFC.
I mean, are the Bucks going in the right form? I mean, the Panthers were that bad. Is it even right to question the Buccaneers?
I think the Bucks left a lot of points on the field that they would have. I think they would have put more up against the better team. They didn't need to. We had most of our backups in at the end of the game, but at the same time, as we mentioned earlier off air, we've probably got half of our starters across offense and defense, or either on injured reserve or the COVID list or something like that at the moment. So I think we're coping and playing well. We're fortunate that our schedule to finish the season is as easy as it is with the personnel challenges we've got at the moment.
So there's a bit of that I kind of want to pick on, and it was something Rob said earlier as well with regard to teams not performing because of COVID restrictions and things like that. You've just mentioned about how the Bucks are suffering because they've got a high number of starters on injured reserve or the COVID list or something like that. Okay, let's compare that to the fortunes of an AFC team that's in the same kind of situation. And apologies to absolutely everyone, because this is going to be the Baltimore Ravens again. Yeah. And you look at the differences between those, how the Bucks are still finding a way to proceed. They're still finding a way to go forward. No, they haven't had every game not every game's been spotless. Not every game's been clean, if we borrow how Rob was talking about the Patriots. But ultimately, the Buccaneers are doing enough to come together and win. The Ravens are coming close an awful lot of times, and you have to ask yourself the question of, why is John Harbaugh going for 2 every time? Is it because they want a definite win, or is it just because he doesn't have the faith in the players that they have available to them, that if you go into overtime, they're going to be able to do the same thing again? Those sort of game tying potential plays that we've seen from them have often felt a lot like, we are throwing absolutely everything into this to get these points, and we have nothing left afterwards. And it kind of feels like they're putting the whole thing into it. And you're talking about, teams when you get into the playoffs, teams and all of that kind of stuff. Ultimately, you beat the team that's in front of you. Any team that makes it to the playoffs is a team that's good enough to get to the playoffs. And, we are fortunate for the last couple of seasons that we haven't had any, was it the Panthers who got through once 7-9? We haven't had a team get through with a losing record for a couple of seasons now. Everyone who's going to be in there is playing well enough to get into the playoffs, and you've got to now look at it and surely think, well, I wouldn't really want to play or not play any of them.
I don't know, though. I mean, in the I know you said, Phil, the NFC is really strong, but I think the Vikings, rubbish.
Yeah.
I think Eagles,
not rubbish,
and
inconsistent.
yeah, but those are beatable teams.
Yeah.
And I think you've got the Saints still in the mix. You've got the
I think
Eagles
the Saints are
still
out of the mix now.
Oh,
I think
yeah, maybe.
the Eagles
Eagles
could
are still in the
presumably
mix.
be in
Eagles
there.
are.
Again, another terrible team that most other teams will beat. And I don't
Yeah,
know.
true.
I'm not really sold on those. I think you're right in terms of the NFC's elite teams are really elite, and you wouldn't want to come up against those. But the other teams that are in the mix are just really average teams that a lot of teams will beat. The Eagles will get beaten by most other teams that are going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Then why hasn't anyone beaten them recently?
I don't know, but they're just they're playing like Washington and the Giants. They're just playing other garbage teams, and it's anybody
that's
can win
true, but
those.
if we look at the Packers and the Browns game at the weekend, was the result of that game because the Packers were quite clearly a better team than the Browns, or was it the fact that Mayfield threw 3 or 4 interceptions and the Packers scored points off of those? Remember, that game started with the Browns stopping the Packers. It wasn't until Baker threw the interception that then got the Packers going. I realise I'm saying this aware of the fact that I hate having these conversations of, well, if you take those incidents out, it's a completely different game.
No, I think it's a good point. But the problem is the teams I'm talking about have got those same sorts of challenges. Jalen Hurts can have a 3 interception game, and you wouldn't think, oh, that's out of the blue. Same with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins can have a 90-yard stinker of a game, and then do you know what I mean? That's kind of my point. It's not that necessarily they wouldn't. They're not good teams against some opponents, but equally they've got the capacity to have those absolute stinker games, and when you go into the playoffs, those games are going to kill you.
Well, if we're again going back to what the original point of Rob's question was, if we're talking about teams that you don't think would progress further in the playoffs. If I'm saying the Patriots for the AFC, I'm going, if we're putting the Vikings as a possibility, I'm saying the Vikings because I have less than zero faith in Kirk Cousins to be able to do anything when the pressure is on. That guy needs to go and have learn the Heimlich maneuver or something to deal with the amount of times he chokes.
Isn't he statistically the best quarterback in the league this year?
He's been very good this year.
Touchdowns to interceptions. But that's what I mean. Kirk could have an absolutely terrible game, or he could have a brilliant game.
First name terms.
Yeah,
Breaking news while we're on the quarterback discussion and potential playoff teams. The Colts have placed Carson Wentz on the reserve COVID list.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Good. It's gone well this week. And he's unvaccinated.
He's unvaccinated, so he's
gonna
definitely out on Sunday against the Raiders.
Who's the Colts backup?
Yeah, it could be anybody at this point.
Sam Ellinger.
Yeah, we got rid of Eason, didn't we?
I mean, but to tie all the points together, JB, when you made the points about the Ravens and the Bucks, and then you made the points about the Browns and the Packers, you're making the same point ultimately, which is quarterback play counts for more than anything else. Mm-hmm. When you said the Bucks have got a lot of players out, the Ravens have got a lot of players out, but one team's coping. Well, one team's without their quarterback, and I know you guys talked about how good their backup players, but it does make a difference. I think for as much as there are some good performances at the moment, there are some superpowers who are really starting to hit their stride. I mean, we've mentioned the Chiefs, we mentioned briefly the Cowboys. I do think there's a lot of a muchness. And the weird thing for me, I do think the Bucks are not the team they were last season, despite the fact they've just won the division and what made it as the 6th seed wildcard last year. I think the Bucks look more dangerous at this time last season than they do now. Admittedly, they got players out, but I think we're talking about.
Yeah, that is fair because we got beat by the Chiefs last year. We got hammered in the first half and then came back well in the second half. We had our bye week, and after the bye week, we didn't lose.
You were lights out.
Yeah.
After the bye, you were
so I
absolutely.
don't disagree with that.
But what you're doing there is you're assessing teams at 2 different points of expectation. Last year, we didn't expect the Buccaneers to be what the Buccaneers ended up being. We thought they were good and they were going to be interesting in the playoff, but we weren't necessarily at this point considering them on the level that they were. We are now assessing essentially that same team with now the previous expectation of, look what they did last year. Are they going to do the same this year? And we're saying, well, no, because we now have that pressure of expectation put on them. I think the Bucks look just as good as they did last year. And it wouldn't surprise me if we did have touchdown Tom lifting the Lombardi again. But I wouldn't necessarily guarantee it again. Like there isn't anybody that I'm looking at this and saying this team's definitely going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. No, so if that's our recap then, let's end with your final thought for the week. What is your big takeaway? Performances good or bad? Players good or bad? What would you pick out? Aldrin, let's start with you. Round us out for the week on the recap show. Where are you taking us?
Oh, what are we talking about? What, players or...
Anything you want. Your standout performance or the standout thing you noticed.
I guess the one thing you'd have to say is Dak Prescott. You know, I think there was a couple of weeks ago where people were saying, oh, he's in a bit of a slump. You know, that offence hasn't really hit stride again, blah, blah, blah. And then he comes out and puts up 40 plus points, looks absolutely lights out. And I guess maybe that whole offence, just because again there was talk like, oh, Amari Cooper's not happy with his involvement, Dak's not playing as well, blah blah blah, you know, all of that kind of usual gumph. And then ultimately Dak shows what he's capable of. Zeke's rushing in 2 touchdowns, Amari Cooper's catching touchdowns, Gallup's involved. You know, it just looks like it's really coming together for them. So yeah, I guess that Cowboys offense really for me.
JB, for you?
I mean, Aldrin did kind of take mine.
Sorry, James.
It's fine. I was looking forward to, for the first time on this podcast, being able to ask the question, how about them Cowboys? I think other than that, it is probably the turnaround, air quotes, in the Chiefs. Because, like, they have, I wouldn't say quietly, but just very effectively just sort of reminded everybody, hey, we're really good.
Yeah, move through the gears.
Yeah, just show us what you got. And a lot of the conversation around the Chiefs before kickoff and even at the start of the game was, how are they going to cope without Travis Kelce? It's that link, that mind meld he almost has with Patrick Mahomes, like we've talked about that Brady had with Julian Edelman, or Montana had with Jerry Rice. Yeah. And it didn't seem to matter. Like, there was absolutely no point in that game that it looked like you thought, oh man, Chiefs really missed Travis Kelce on that play, because they've just got great playmakers at every point that you'd want them to.
Didn't even get Hill involved, did they?
No.
You know, without him and Kelce, and they still.
That's the thing. I will say this, I thought the Steelers did a really good job of limiting Hill and making sure that they didn't have the options that he usually had. And unfortunately, that came at the expense of other people on the field. Byron Pringle, all of that kind of stuff. There was a line that Greg Olsen used on commentary a couple of weeks ago that Rob and I really appreciated at the time, when he was talking about how when you're playing, one person has to win. Everyone else can draw, one person has to win, and you've got success in what you're trying to do. And that's what the Chiefs essentially executed. Tyreek Hill didn't need to be the one to win. He could draw the coverage to allow other people to go.
Ran the ball well as well, actually, the Chiefs, I thought, this week. I know Hilaire didn't make the full game, did he, over Sled? But I thought they still got a touchdown before he left the game. Yeah, I thought they ran well.
I mean, let's not go too overboard. I mean, the Steelers put up a fight, and obviously it was really tough, and it was terrible.
You don't have a 90-year-old quarterback that can't move, you'd be fine.
PB, talking to 90-year-old quarterback. Hey, what you got for us? Takeaway for the week.
Performance of the week's got to be Joe Burrow. 4 touchdowns, 525 yards. Motivated by the comment from the Ravens coach. I can't remember which was it, their offensive line coach, or they called it
defensive coordinator.
Oh, that was it. Was saying let's not give him a gold jacket just yet.
For a gold jacket. Yeah.
Which, you know, is a fair off the cuff comment, but it obviously motivated Burrow to go up and put a performance like that. He's been consistently good all season, but you know, this was a game for the ages, wasn't it? 4 touchdowns, 525 yards.
Because he's had like those. He's one of the interception leaders in the league, right? As a quarterback, he's thrown a bunch, but still looks lights out.
But the thing with that is, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier when I was quizzing you guys on some stuff. Let us not forget that Brett Favre, at one point in his career, had the most touchdowns and the most interceptions in NFL history. So you have that kind of gunslinging mentality, you're going to get picked off sometimes. I think the big thing from Burrow has always been, he gets picked off, he sits down on the bench, he looks annoyed for a minute or two, and then he gets back on and like, right, who am I going to throw open this time? So
An amazing thing as well, last little thing on the Bengals, we talked about teams who will get picked off early in the playoffs, and I mean, if we work on the principle that they're still in the mix, they didn't even get a mention, and from where they were last season, that is phenomenal progress. They are looking a super team in so many ways, and maybe a year away from being the real McCoy. My last one's going to be brief. You started this roundup with the Cowboys, Aldrin. I'm going to end it with the Cowboys. Jerry Jones is the punchline to so many NFL jokes, right? And when you think about front office, just front office horror shows, front office dysfunction, he's the guy who's too involved, does all the wrong things, says all the wrong things. You look at the young players they have drafted in that franchise. They have got superstar upon superstar upon superstar with Diggs and Parsons. You got the CD Lambs of this one. They have drafted such good players that actually I think they. I'll kick off because we're going to go around the room with who do we think is the best team in the NFL right now, and I'm going to say the Dallas Cowboys.
Nice. Yeah, if you think where their defense was as well last year. And then they've drafted some absolute superstars, and they've completely changed the complexion of that franchise, haven't they?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's difficult to look beyond them. I still think the Bucks are kind of the team that I would be very concerned about, just because even with injuries, COVID list players, this, that, and the other, they're still beating teams comfortably and not really having to get super angry Brady. Come off of the bench and get a win. So yeah, I think them.
JB?
I mean, in my head, I was trying to decide between the Cowboys and the Buccaneers based on this week, and you've picked both of those.
You can pick them as well. You don't have to pick a different team.
It just feels like I'm copying all of you. But you guys went first. So I mean, we've talked a bit about sort of both of them. We've talked a bit about the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs have got an awful lot of fire going right now, and the Chiefs would be my AFC team that I wouldn't want to run into. Probably the Cowboys would be the NFC team that I wouldn't want to run into at the moment, but that could potentially change next week.
Yeah.
Phil?
I'd say the Chiefs.
Chiefs? So the Chiefs get 2 votes.
I mean, they're on, a 7-game tear? One behind the Dolphins.
That defence looks good.
They look like they've got it together. Sorensen's kind of not giving up yards willy-nilly anymore.
All we had to do was call him out on the pod.
There you go. But they even without Tyreek Hill getting involved at the weekend with Kelsey not being in the game, they were comfortable. I mean, the Steelers were poor, as we've already discussed, but they were comfortable. If I'm an NFC team, that's the team that I don't want to be lining up opposite me in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Nice. So on that bombshell, everybody, we have managed to pick our best team in the NFL. At the moment, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. Thank you, gents. I'll look forward to be back in your company in 2 days' time to do our Thursday show. Always nice to do them live. And for everyone else, we'll catch you in 48 hours' time.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.